Right on. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony.
Hey, Tony.
I know you guys are all excited to get started on the 4 steps, so I'll start a minute early here. I see you chomping away at the bit. Anyways, I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. How we open this meeting is with the 3rd step prayer. What's the first requirement in making this thing work? God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
Amen.
Like I said, recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Sobriety date's April 8th, 1989. This is my service meeting. Tuesday, Fridays, and Wednesdays in Langley. Home groups, the Whale group, Saturday. In Langley, if you ever show up there, it's a good transition meeting. A lot of new people. Get to disturb a lot of people there on a constant basis. I really enjoy that meeting. We're on the 4th step. Probably, most of the steps are really misunderstood unless you're going kind of through the basic text and kind of understand why you're doing it. A lot of people don't know why they're doing a 4th step. And a lot of people start doing a behavioral modification or immoral inventory, or they don't know why they're doing it. A lot of people do the inventory like it's to find things that they need to work on. Anybody ever hear that? Do a 4th step. These are the things I need to work on. Right? That's not the purpose of the 4th step, because if you were able to work on them, then you wouldn't need to do a 4th step. Right? So when we went through this, by the time we got to we agnostics, you were able to diagnose yourself what kind of alcoholic you were, right? By the time we got to page 44, you had a clear understanding of what alcoholism is and isn't. Then you know what type of alcoholic you are. A lot of people in the fellowship don't know what type of alcoholic they are, right? A lot of people may have drinking problems, but what type of alcoholic you are. So if I was to do a survey now, would you be able to say what type of alcoholic you are? A lot of people say, don't ask me. Look away, right? I know what type I am by the result of the course of action taken before this. So before that, I had no idea. So you hear a lot of people say, I did step 1 before I got here. It's kind of impossible to do unless you know what alcoholism is, because what you're doing is conceding and admitting to having this problem. That in itself is not enough to fix it. If knowing you had a problem was enough to fix it, how many people would need to come to AA to find out what's going on? How many people has relapsed here? Right? And so a lot of people say, I've never relapsed. Then you wouldn't come to AA, because you come to AA is because why can't I stop drinking? Right? That's the question. How many people wanted to know that? How many people made a promise never to drink again? And you would have passed the lie detectors test. And how many people drank again? So there's something more to this, right? How many people are hoping this was a behavioral modification course? Just be a nicer person. I still wouldn't be sober. There's so much more to this. I thought that's what it was, because a lot of people I tried sobering up with gave me the impression that you work on yourself, you try to become a better person, and just, I don't know, anybody ever try that approach? Open doors for people, smile, be nice, do something kind every day, join a church, get in the choir, get hooked up with somebody in the choir, get drunk. No, I'm just, I've tried every known means to get sober before actually doing this course of action. So in the 5th step, they talk about people have turned to easier methods, right? And invariably they get drunk again. So a lot of us, I've done 4 steps according to other people in the past before doing this process, and it's led to misery and depression. I used to do that life story inventory. Anybody ever do that life story inventory? My God, is that depressing? Because you're not saying anything that you don't already know. You're just reconfirming what you already know, right? And you're putting it on paper, and you're the one dealing with it, which is the problem. When you're going through this process on your own power, you're left with who? Yourself. And when you open up a can of worms, anybody ever go digging in their past? And once you're in there, you find it really hard to get out? Causes that depression because you're going in alone. That's the difference between this process and other processes. So I've had people very interested in my life since junior kindergarten. Like I got these report cards I was showing Eddie the other. I'm very interested in Tony's development. We look with great interest. If he could learn to communicate without using his fist, that'd be great. If he could realize other people in the class are entitled to their opinion, right? So it started off at a really young age. Was I alcoholic? I don't know, but man, I was getting ready for a drink. When I took a drink, it was kind of like fantastic. So, and there's always been alcohol in my life. Right? So a lot of people go, oh, when was the first time you drank? You ever hear that? It's not the first time you drank is where alcoholism starts. It's the first time it starts causing you problems and you can't correct or stop. That's where alcoholism is. Like I'm allergic to pistachios. The first time I ate pistachios, I didn't have no reaction to them. And as the years went on, I started having some reaction to it, but I didn't know what it was. I put it off as something else. And then I had a severe reaction where I ended up in hospital. And so when the nurse was hooked up to IV and all that stuff in emergency, and then they were explaining my situation, how well do you think I listened to that nurse as she explained my condition? I was watching her lips move. I was in emergency. There was chaos all around me. I never heard nothing but her explaining my problem. And by the time she finished explaining it, she explained it in such a way that I went and I bought 2 EpiPens. One to travel with me and one that goes in my luggage. Like I always have EpiPens. And then as time went on, it's kind of like I just don't eat pistachios. And I've never had a desire or an inkling to eat them. If I kept on eating them, would there be a problem more than the fact that I'm allergic to it? Yes. If I ended up in emergency more than 2 times and I talked to that same nurse, right? And she says, didn't I explain to you the last time you were here? And I said, yeah, but I thought if I had it in ice cream, it'd be different. Yeah. Right? How well do you think she would look at me? She'd go, so the 3rd time, would she ask me to see a dietitian or a psychiatrist? Because there's something going on here. Like there's something more than I'm able to comprehend here. There's something more at work, and that's kind of like alcoholism. How many people have been told here that you may have a problem? And how many people thought they had a problem for even mentioning it to you that you may have a problem? Because you never seen a problem with it, right? It was still kind of manageable. You could live with the consequences. Anybody here? Relocate, get new friends, change jobs, change careers, change apartments, because as your alcoholism takes off, you got to downsize. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. It's all about downsizing, right? Because you can't change the way you drink, so you got to change your environment to accommodate your drinking. Anybody have that story here? Anybody sit with a drink in their hand wondering what's the matter with their life? Yeah. Waiter, what are you doing? I'm contemplating. There's something seriously wrong with my life. How many people's meditated over a drink here? Trying to figure out what's the matter with their life. So when we go through here, by the time you get to We Agnostics, you know exactly what's going on, because the preceding chapters are designed to inform you what alcoholism is and what alcoholism isn't, right? And by the time you get here, you kind of be armed with the facts about alcoholism and maybe about yourself. And then you discover how many symptoms are there in alcoholism? Two. But a lot of people give you the impression there's 3, right? And if they would have started with the 3rd, we find out when we get into working with how it works, they talk about we get spiritually sick as the result of our alcoholism. Our spiritual condition didn't create alcoholism. It was the solution to our problem. How many people took a drink here and really had no more problems? I don't know if it took away the problems, but you just didn't care anymore, right? Just like, and Bill talked about that, right? People were jumping to their death, and what did Bill do? He went back to the bar. How many people use that as a solution, right? And then when the consequences get to a place where you can't even live with them, then there's a problem, right? But you're usually the last one to know what that problem is. Everybody else already knows. And then when you find out what alcoholism is, you realize alcoholism has been happening for quite a while now, not just by the time you decided to do something about it. That's why we admitted that we have these symptoms. It's been ongoing. It's been present. It's been the conditioning factor to have you coming to AA or having your life look the way it is. So abstinence. How many people have tried abstinence here? Why doesn't abstinence work? Because we're dealing with an illness, right? And we can't see, feel, and touch it, because if you could see, feel, and touch it, then you could do something about it when it's happening. Anybody I'll watch out for it. That's what it says in step 2, right? Came to believe that your self-awareness will stop you from picking up in the future. How many people were hoping that's what step 2 said? I learned my lesson. Anybody learned their lesson more than once here? And then we really mean it about the 5th time. The first 4 times I was lying, right? So I got 11 years of in and out. My last relapse, I went to 360 meetings in 90 days. I was in 4, 12, and 12 studies. My birthday was April 6th. I turned 27. It was in 1989. And that's 11 years. My first meeting was 11 years prior to that. So 1976 was my first meeting in AA. So 11 years later would be, 1989, right? So in that 11 years, I had no idea what I was dealing with, and it took a couple people to con me into a big book study and took me through this. I was so ill, I didn't even see the benefits of doing this. Once they've taken me through this and showed me the recipe, I've never drank since through the application. I've never met anybody who's ever done this process who hasn't had the experience who's ever relapsed. Not one person in the last 30 years, including me, which I'm of the hopeless variety. I'm the alcoholic of the hopeless variety. I'm beyond human aid. I cannot see, feel, and touch. I don't even know when I'll pick up a drink again. And that's been my story. So April 6th, I stayed sober. It was a Thursday. April 7th was a Friday, and I went to the meeting, talked about what a great job I did on April 6th. April 8th was a Saturday. I got a 3-month chip, and I talked like I was getting an Academy Award. Anybody talk like that here? I like to thank me, and I like to thank me, and I like to thank me. Oh, and the people around me. But it was all self-based recovery, right? And I had all the slogans, I had all the catchphrases, I had all the bumper sticker. I had formulated a talk by being around here because I'm a bit of a chameleon. Any chameleons around here? You hear something really good at one meeting, and you're sharing it at another meeting. As long as nobody asks you what it means, you're usually okay, right? So George started asking me what this stuff meant. So by the time I got qualified to do this and I went through this, and by the time I got to step 3, I understood what this process was about. So when we get to page 60, it talks about being convinced we're at step 3. And then they go through the human condition here, which is my problem. I suffer from the human condition coupled with alcoholism, right? What's making my decisions before the spiritual experience is what?
Alcoholism.
Alcoholism coupled with my human condition. It's kind of neck and neck. So in order to take care of the alcohol condition, what condition needs to be resolved? My human condition, right? That's why they say we have a spiritual solution to your problem. And then they find out we have a spiritual malady. It's really hard to pinpoint. It exhibits itself in a lot of different ways. So when you look at page 62, they talk about this human condition, this malady, this angst, this thing that drives human beings. Not just alcoholics, but human beings. And here's the quality of the highlight of our assets when we come in here. You want to read that? Selfish, self-centered?
Alcoholic Ivana? Selfish self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past we have made decisions based on self that later placed us in a position to be hurt.
So they understand that because they went through a process, those that wrote this thing. As a new person, when George asked me that, why are you mad at these people? How come this keeps on happening? I wasn't able to tell him why. He says, why are you mad at these people? Because they're a-holes, they're this, they're that, they've done this. He says, no, why are you mad at them? Why are you so affected by these people? I didn't understand what he was talking about, because I only had my understanding of this stuff. Like, I was pretty warped. My thinking was pretty warped based on me through my whole life. I remember sitting in a 12 and 12 study, a step 8, and I was probably, at this time, 10 years in and out. This is when I met my now sponsor, Alex. And there was Chuck, Damon, and all these guys, and they were talking about step 8 and a list they made from the people they hurt through their conduct. And then when it came to me, I said, I never did nothing to nobody that didn't have it coming to them. And the only list I got is the people to get even with. How many people think like that here? There are a few of you putting your hands up, and the rest of you are kind of not participating, right? It's not entrapment. There will not be. Right? So my thinking's warped in how I see things. And you couldn't tell me different based on my upbringing, based where I come from, based on my survival skills, based on everything that formulated me. That was my best thinking. So if you're driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion, what 2 thoughts do you want to go with? So you really can't trust your own process, right? How many people has been left in confusion or problem in relationships with people, places, and things, wondering how you get there and wondering what their problem is? How many people spent a lot of time wondering what their problem is? How many people spend a lot of time that life's picking on you? How many people, the ultimate one is you get to a place that total of demoralization, incomprehensible demoralization, and you think God's doing it to you. How many people have the ultimate God card? Look what God's doing to me. Yes, look what God's doing to you. If God was doing to you, you'd look a lot worse than you are. So our inability to see the truth about us, right? So they go through, so our troubles.
So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot.
So we kind of read that. We're an extreme example of the human condition, right? People think like us, but normal people are people who are functioning at some level. Somewhere in their thinking, they say, this thinking isn't working for me, and stop thinking it. We don't stop thinking it. We're still thinking of it at the bottom of a bottle. Anybody still drinking, thinking about what those people that aren't carrying that resentment, nothing? Normal people don't do that, right? Because they're not coupled with alcoholism, they're able to change their thinking. So what I mean by that is my wife one day, I said, man, I was telling her how we think. She goes, I think like that, which kind of made me nervous. And she said, well, wait a minute. She says, the difference between me and you is I don't find myself at the bottom of a bottle still thinking it's true. So you had to go there, right? So we're fundamentally different, my wife and I, in a lot of areas. How I'm driven by certain things where she's not driven by these things. But she has the human condition. So do I. But what happens with me is I don't know where reality starts and where it stops. I formulate ideas that I believe to be true, and you can't tell me different. Anybody like that here? Yep. And then after apologizing for those thoughts that you thought were true, so we see this cycle, eh? And so they arise out of ourselves. Where's this other place that says, on page 54, they talk about, we won't go there, but they talk about, on these things, the fabric of which our lives were constructed, our thinking, our feelings, and our emotions. All our life experience has us responding to life today, right? So all of us have different experiences that have us here, but the basis of it is being driven by thoughts and ideas and emotions. How many people have certain emotions and thoughts and ideas that they can't shake when they're in it, that are consumed by it? And then one thought starts another thought that starts another thought, and then you start involving the people around you. You ever notice when you become a little irritable and discontent that the people around you are just so thrilled with your demeanor? Yeah. Anybody still go home, put the key in the door, and there's a hesitation on the inside of the door to see what kind of emotional condition you're in? Oh, yeah, a couple of me, yeah. So the promises aren't coming true for these people around you, but every meeting you go to, they're all coming true, right? Anyways, so they arise out of ourselves. I don't know what they are yet. So on page 62, they talk about the inability to shake self, or the self-centeredness, or the focus on ourselves. And then they talk about this idea that these spiritual principles, God, the Father, whatever you want to call the principle, the agent, we become. This idea was possible through going through this course of action. Is it extremely hot in here?
Yeah. Should open the door there.
It is cooking in here.
It's hot.
So, sometimes there's a guy that has a resentment against this big book. He turns on the heat. Those big book people. Right, the new guy. Turn the heat up. Okay. So then, on page 63, we see that they're talking about a new experience as the result of this course of action. And then we see that they talk about we are now at step 3, right? And they give us an idea here, right? if it was possible to achieve this here, then you wouldn't need to do the rest of the steps. Step 3 is an idea of the possibility of obtaining these experiences through going through this course of action, right? In order to experience the step 3 kind of dialogue or the outlay or the summary, because it's a summary of the course of action, right? So by the time I finish the course of action, I'll comprehend what they're talking about in step 3 here. And so we make this decision to do what?
Go through the rest of the work.
Turn our will and our minds over to...
Yeah, to the care of God. And so what's God's will for us at this point in time?
Go through the work.
Do the rest of the work.
Do the rest of the work. Because if you knew what, if you're, a lot of people are mistaken. I said, I give my will to God. It doesn't say to the care of. So if you gave somebody something to look after, hey, can you take care of this for me while I'm away? Would you expect it back when you come back from vacation?
Yeah.
That's kind of like this. So the best analogy I've ever heard was somebody says, you put your will in an envelope, you hand it over to God, and then by step 10, you get the envelope back. Right? You get it back. So what I'm trusting this process is to create this change that I agreed that I need in step 2. And what did I agree that I need in step 2?
Spiritual experience.
Or a psychic change, spiritual experience. We found out what that meant in the back of the appendix. Because if I don't obtain this thing, what's my fate?
Drink again.
I'm going to drink again. So it says it's a recipe to remove alcoholism from my human condition. Doesn't mean I'm not alcoholic anymore. It just means I'm not suffering from alcoholism, and I can start treating the human condition, which is 2 different things, because I can't treat alcoholism on my own. I need to go through this process. So then what confirms that I've started step 3 or done step 3?
You start step 4.
I start step 4. So if you haven't started step 4, you haven't done step 3 yet. That's why they say the wording's quite optional so long as we express the idea. The idea of what? That I'm hoping to experience these things that they're talking about, right? So then we go over to the next page and we find out on page 64, alcohol is but a symptom. We've kind of covered this in great detail. And then we talk about, therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4, and what they're saying is we're going to give you a new recipe on how to look at life, because the way you look at life isn't working for you. There's a mechanism in your brain that can't see these things that other people are able to see. So we need to reformulate how you look at things so you can start applying these spiritual principles different to get relief from it. But first you need to be honest about the stock and trade. You need to see it differently. And then so they talk about here, we did exactly the same thing with our lives. You want to hit us up with that?
Yeah, we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure, being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us. We considered it its common manifestation.
So remember before, driven by 100 forms of fear, right, and self-delusion, 100 forms. So they say, here, we're going to hit some of the basic ones that are causing you your most problems. And if you could learn how to formulate these principles in these areas, then you could address any problem you have. Because it all stems from the same place. But you need to learn a recipe on being able to acknowledge these things on a different level. Not an intellectual level, but a conscious level. That in step 11, you'll intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle you. It becomes a working part of the mind. You're more in touch with your consciousness through meditation. You're able to deal with things as they come up. But right now, it's almost impossible because you're driven by all these things that you carry. As long as you're carrying all these things, how effective are you going to be in today? Because these things are happening at a subconscious level. You don't even know they're eating your lunch for you. But when they come up, how many people has been plagued with depression and self-pity? You just find yourself in it. That's not today's stuff. That's stuff you're still carrying. That's like if you put an outhouse in your basement, you're going to have a little stink in your living room, aren't you? When you sit in your living room and go, what the hell is that? But you're not too sure what it is because somebody put an outhouse in the basement. But you'll know the effect of it. You're kind of like, what the hell? And that's kind of like the 4th step. We need to get the outhouse outside so you can enjoy your living room. Does that kind of make more sense? A lot of us have been sitting in this stuff for way too long. We're used to the smell. People come over and visit, go, what the hell? You go, what? No, sir. Anybody ever visit somebody who lived by a railroad tracks? or an airport?
Yeah.
They get used to everything. I used to live by the airport, the jumbo landing, and everything's shaking in the house, and you're sitting there like nothing's happening. You're just used to the sound. So imagine being a CN Railway on one side and the airport on the other side. Anybody visiting you would be really uncomfortable with what's happening. And that's everybody around you. They're very uncomfortable with what's happening with you. Anybody still very uncomfortable with what's happening with you and still have issues with you and still on high alert when you show up? Anybody phone people and there's a long pause? Hello? Anybody still having people not answering the phone? But anyways, we'll leave it alone. So we're going to look at the common manifestations. Okay, that means these are the main things that eat our lunch for us and will cause us our greatest problems and greatest handicaps. Unless we find a way of having these things removed or find peace with them, we'll continue to relapse. Right? So, resentment.
Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease.
So we hear a lot of people say, oh, I have a spiritual disease. No, from the resentment. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. So this is like the abscess on our spirit, on our soul, on our consciousness. It's an abscess that's sitting there, right? That's what's causing the problem, is the abscess on our spirit. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. Does that kind of make sense? As long as that abscess is there, how well are we going to function? We're not, because it's poisoning ourselves, right? So that's what. So the resentment is causing the abscess. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease, right? From what? From the resentment. Okay.
For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically.
So they use the word malady again, as they did in regards to the second symptom of alcoholism on page 23 that centers in our mind. It's really hard. They're trying to describe it in the best way they know how, but it's really hard to really kind of describe it. So they give you, this is what it looks like. Right, here's the areas what it looks like, because it's really hard to pinpoint. It's something that I've never been able to really go to myself, how do you feel? Oh, I think I have a spiritual malady happening. It has to be connected to something in order to see it. So when we're spiritually right, everything's right. When we're not spiritually right, nothing's right. It's like they used to have this saying, no peace. The way it was spelt was N-O-K-N-O-W, no peace, right? And then no peace, whatever. No God, no peace, something like that, right? And it was spelled N-O. Just the changing of the words. No peace, no God. No God, no peace.
Yeah, that's it.
Right? I know you're supposed to help me out there. I was
trying to figure it out myself.
I seen everybody going, what the hell?
English is confusing.
Yeah, English is very confusing. Okay, so they're saying when the spiritual maladies, this thing inside, when all these things are removed from my consciousness, all these abscesses that I carry, that carry emotions and ties to my past that are interfering with today, when these things are removed, how well do you think I'll live in today? Really good. So they're saying we're going to give you the recipe, but let's start going through this. So when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So we see that this change happened, the psychic change, the spiritual experience. And I think when they talk about physically is emotionally here, because most people try to deal with their emotions. If you're mentally not right, how are your emotions going to be? Yeah, not right. And if you're being driven by all the things you're still carrying, how are you going to be mentally, emotionally? So subconsciously, these things will determine how you think and how you feel. Does that kind of make sense? Okay.
In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We list people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry.
So we made a list. And this is the start of meditation. They're teaching they don't tell you this, but it's actually the start of learning how to meditate. You do the third step prayer, you sit quietly, and you just make a list. How many people found it almost impossible to make a list? So you're being an observer how you function or how you operate with basic information that's going to save your life and your resistance to it. Anybody get some names that they weren't going to put out? Anybody think of names that, and then their other part of their brain says, You've already dealt with that. You don't need to put it down. How many people got that? I'm not mad at anybody. I've forgiven all those people. Well, write down all those people you've forgiven. Oh, there's a lot of them. You ever hear people talk about forgiveness 20 minutes later? Okay, we've gone through the list of everybody they forgive. Okay. So we got the list. And then what do we do with the list? We got these sheets here that you can go through. And so when we have the list, we put the name over on one column here, and then in the next column,
we asked ourselves why we were angry.
Anybody don't know why they're angry at these people? Oh, we know why. What they did. That's why, right? And so then the cause. Why are we angry? And then the third column is where the interesting stuff was, where it stems from.
In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our ambitions, our personal relationships, I'm missing the page, were hurt or threatened, so we were sore. We were burnt up. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations, which had been interfered with?
And that's all these columns are. A lot of people think the exercise is writing a long documentary on it. It's not. It's to be aware of how self is created, or how these things are still inside your consciousness, are still eating your lunch for you. I don't know how else to say that. And where it stems from. So I get to see now why I'm mad at these people is because it's my self-esteem that was interfered with, or my personal relationship. One of my instincts were associated with this harm. Right? And it's kind of interesting. So now when George asked me, why are you mad at these people? I said, because they affected my self-esteem. They affected my personal relationship. They affected my material, my emotional, my acceptable sex, my hidden sex. And if you're working with a sponsor, they'll help you go through that. But and then my ambitions. So I get a good idea how self operates. This is where the unmanageability stems from. Right? And if I can't stay sober, is your life manageable? So that's where that our lives have become unmanageable. If I can't stay sober and I'm a prey to misery and depression, and I can't control my emotional nature, how successful in life am I going to be? Oh, well, periodically I get 2 months here, 3 months there, and any pyromaniacs here? Bring your own gas and matches to the party? Burn it down. Anybody burn their life down here more than once? Anybody quit a job and show them? And they're still operating. Okay. So we see, which is interesting, eh? Okay, then we go. Go ahead.
We went, do you want me to sit down?
So we're usually as defined as this example. So we see this example is just transferred over to the sheets here. Right? We get a rough idea about the stock and trade, where this stuff comes from, what self is made out of. So we see self is made out of these instincts. Right? Now I see how I operate. Now it's kind of interesting, and this is what you'll use in step 10 and mostly in 11. When you're reconstructing your life, this is where they ask you in step 11, when you go through your day, what you could have done differently. And you see, based on one of your instincts, you had conflict with a person, place, or thing. And then on your review, what could we have done instead? You said, I see I'm having a problem here with my self-esteem. I don't go work on my self-esteem. I work on my spiritual condition. And when my spiritual condition resolves itself, I no longer have a problem with people, places, and things. So what I start seeing is when I'm instinct-based, right, I'm conflict-oriented. And when I'm spiritually based, I'm more in harmony with life around me, mostly myself. So what I get to see, what it looks like when I'm spiritually based or instinct-based. I'm one or the other, right? And when I'm instinct-based, this is what it looks like. I'm in conflict. When I'm running the show, this is what it looks like. Are we having fun yet? Let's put another name down. Okay, sorry. So we're usually as defined as this example. Mr. Brown, all the causes. Mr. Jones, all the causes. And we do that here. We don't fill in the first column with all the names. We put one name, all the causes. Point form, not a big story. Right? My mom, her boyfriends, her attention to my sister, like on and on and on. Does that kind of make sense? And 2 pages later, let's go to my dad. 6 pages later, let's go to my sister, which is difficult because in that conflict, I wouldn't put my sister down. on the list, and I thought about it for 2 days. And then once I put my sister on the list, 6 names followed. It unleashed a whole bunch of blockages from other areas. And it doesn't go in the area. A lot of people go, we'll go from age 5 to 6. No, you got to do it as your conscious releases it. So you could have something in junior kindergarten or before, and then something in high school is how it's released from inside of you, and then you kind of see how your attachment to it. Right? And as you're doing the prayers, as you start reliving the story, which is in the exercise, what do you do as you start feeling and reliving the story? Pray. So that means you interrupt, you step back from it, and say, this is not the purpose of the exercise. You remind yourself what the purpose of the exercise is, and do the 3rd step prayer. As you do the 3rd step prayer, you see how the bondage and the difficulties arise out of yourself, and the inability to have domain over your own thinking and your emotions, how driven you are by your own thinking and your own emotions, how you're a slave to you. Yay, having fun yet? Should we do the wave start on this side of the room? Go. Okay. So we turn back to the list.
We're at the bottom, right?
Oh, yeah.
We went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people often were quite wrong.
Thoroughly. So that means, like, if you've gone through treatment, they usually do 5 or 6 to give you some relief. Here's thoroughly. You need to get rid of all that stuff. It's just like a thorough cleaning. Not just the dishes you see, a thorough cleaning. There's a big difference between just doing what you can see and a thorough cleaning. Anybody hide their dishes under the sink? Anybody ever get to a point where they look at their sink, back when you're drinking, you look in the sink and there's like this much grease and you got to unplug it, put your hand in it to go unplug it? Use a fork. Okay, there we go. And that's kind of like us, and the stains on the, you look at it, it's so overwhelming that it's time to move. No. But here they're saying, we're going to show you how to compartmentalize it so it's manageable. Empty the sink, pile the dishes, right? Get clean. Like, they're going to show you how to make it manageable so that the end result is you have a clean apartment. Some of the stains will remain, but you work on them as time goes on. Right? And you're not the cleaner. You're just the applier of the cleaner. The cleaner is your relationship with a power greater than yourself. Anybody have some stains that just takes a lot of work? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got.
True or false?
True.
Oh, we like those people, eh?
The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got.
So we see it shifts. After resentment, who do you turn on? You turn on yourself, right? So and that's the story of all of us. And when you turn on yourself, it's really bad. Like, you need to get, you can't be in depression and walking. You ever notice that? You got to sit down. And to really enjoy it, you got to kind of get horizontal, right? It takes work. Some of us really enjoy it.
In the dark.
Come on, in the dark. Here we go. Shut the phone off. Oh, no, leave the phone on. Make sure people are phoning you, seeing it. But don't answer it. And if something says phone, somebody said, no, I'm going to enjoy this moment. It's me time. And then if you really work it, you get to the place where you're at your own funeral. Crying.
Anybody been there? Bad for me.
Yeah, I feel so bad for me. Is there anybody else? Time to get in a relationship. I need help. No. Sorry. Okay. I had to go there. Okay, move on.
As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness.
So the problem is deep resentment. See, the problem is we can't see it, and a lot of it's really buried. Some of that stuff is behind closed doors. And it does come up every once in a while. You find yourself reliving something that way in the past, right? Like, I used to get this vision of me stuck. I was in a doorway as a kid, and I had no place to go, and I used to be an observer of me, and that loneliness I felt in that doorway. It was cold, and there's snow on the ground. There's nobody in the house. Like, I remember sitting in between the screen door and the door. I was just a little kid, and I remember the pain and agony I had in that moment. I'm not too sure what was surrounding it, but when I revisit that in my mind, I was back there again. I was still that kid in that doorway, or other episodes of things happening to me, but then I'd rebury it, and it would be a year before it'd come up again, or 3 years. Anybody have that kind of story?
Yeah.
So what happens is we think we deal with it because we're not thinking about it. Or I don't have that many resentments. Well, that's why we make the list. And if it comes to mind, write it down. And so by the time you get here, that deep resentment, as long as that stuff's present, are we going to reconstruct our lives? What's determining how we respond to people, places, and things is those things. Right? Those things are still talking us out of happiness today. How many people talk themselves out of happiness here? It's not you doing it. It's those things. It's those memories, those feelings of things that you can't see, feel, and touch that are saying, don't go that way. The pain, the agony, right? The connection, the dependence, the intimacy. Any people have problems with relationships there? It's usually connected to something in the past that you think is going to happen in the present, but your consciousness don't tie those two things together. And that's what this 4 steps starts to do, right? You start unlocking all these things and you kind of go, well, but the difference is you're not going through it alone. You're going through it and starting to see how this power is possible to create a change within your life. This is where you see this thing that don't make no sense. Prayer actually starts to work. It creates a shift within inside of you where you're able to be an observer of these things and step back from it emotionally. It's like having a stereo with surround sound that's too loud. The first thing this does is turn down the stereo so you're comfortable enough to watch the screen. And then as time goes on through practicing this, there's no volume whatsoever. There's no emotional attachment to it. But some of that stuff will carry in your 6 and 7 and 11, and it might take years to get, but it's manageable if you use this recipe. Some of this stuff shifted. It took like 17 years for some of these grave emotional mental disorders, these attachments that I had, but they weren't determining my life for me. And then when they did start coming up to ruin the relationships that I was in, that's where sponsorship comes in, that's where the fellowship comes in, and that's where these ideas come in that you're able to work past those things, not the sabotage, the word sabotage, but you're not really knowing you're sabotaging it. What you're doing is talking yourself out of happiness. So you're able to get the right idea and move toward that, move past the pain, and it subsides for new experiences. Does that kind of make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave.
So people miss this part. Like first time I went through, my sponsor said, hold on a second, look at this. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might be worthwhile? I got a little offended by that. But then I started having to look at how much time did I spend in yesterday? How much time do I spend in the future? How much time do I spend with attachment to things of what might happen, or it's going to happen, or what did happen? How much time did I relive these feelings, these emotions, and these pains, these angst? How many times did I come to my awareness of living in a story that's already happened? Because when I come to of the awareness of the story, I'm already in the story. Anybody been there? And that's what they're to the precise extent that I permit these. So the recipe is starting to say now I acknowledge this is starting to happen, right? I'm the narrator of the story now. Instead of saying, now I got a channel changer, which is my relationship with a power greater than myself. I don't like what's on the screen or the volume it's playing on. I'm able to turn it down and change channels. So that means I stop, step back from it, pray, and change the channel. I shift my thinking to the recipe. And as time goes on, this thing stops having a hold on me. Doesn't mean I don't still have the experience of it. We'll see how our experience can benefit others. That means when I talk about my story, it doesn't create, and for years I talk about my story and it bring up emotional pain, right? And like I'd still be stuck to the pain, but to unravel it, to stand back from it, and to be an observer of it is really a gift. There's one or two things in my life from my past that still, when it rises up, it'll trap me for a second, and I'll live it because I want to relive the whole thing. Anybody relive the whole thing? I know the story, but I want to stay in it because it has me locked in it. It has me hook, line, and sinker. So here, I start, instead of permitting it, I step back from it. I acknowledge what happened. I acknowledge I wish I could have done it differently, and I acknowledge I would correct it if I could. So where I correct it is within inside of me. I don't permit these things to happen anymore. I couldn't do it before because I didn't have the power to access change. Lack of power is our dilemma, to create the change within myself to have a new experience. They're saying here, I don't have to permit these things anymore. And if you do, you're the one allowing it to happen. Because you have a recipe now to create a change within inside of yourself, but you're stuck to your story is giving you some form of satisfaction or some form of, I hate to say it that way, but pain. We get used to pain. Because it's ours. Nobody can take it from you. You can nurture it. You can turn it. It's just mine. Go find a quiet place to sit down and really mold it. Get some Kleenex out and it's the same story. And believe me, I've had trauma beyond. I could spend the next 2 weeks talking about trauma here. I've been there, done that. There's freedom from it, and it's hard to believe that we can get freedom from it. But if you've dug a hole 15 feet deep, it's going to take you 15 feet up to get out of it. But it doesn't have to take you as many years to get out of it. I don't know how else to say that. So the best thing that this is they talk about here, I used to picture my soul as being a big tower, but it went into the ground. And as I went down the staircase, at the top it was well lit, and as I went down the staircase, as I started spinning around, it started getting darker and more blacker. The rock started getting more black, and the water was running off of it, and the mold was starting to build, and the smell was starting to happen. And in each one of these cells that were connected to I would look in, but I was always looking out from the inside. Now I'm kind of opening up these doors, and inside the room's dark. And I used to find myself in that room. Now I bring a candle and I put it in that room. So each room within my past has a candle in it. I don't know how else to explain that. So I don't have to go live there anymore. It's no longer a dark place for me to go. I'm no longer entrapped by it. I have a freedom from it. But I had to go down those compartments within inside of myself to put that there. And that's what this is kind of saying, right? It gets really interesting here.
We found that it is fatal, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit.
Fatal, is that good? Fatal. This is serious stuff here. And so when we have these emotions that arise, this cyst that arise, it shuts us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. So we're not always disconnected, but this emotion, this memory, this pain, this agony, this trauma separates us from ourselves. Now we become instinct-based. Does that kind of make sense? When you're in that, how many people feel anxiety? The fight or flight, the breathing, everything starts to shift and there's nothing happening. There's nothing happening. What happened was back then. What you're doing is reliving, refeeling, resentment, carrying. How many people are here right now? How many people started thinking about different things within their own life? That's what the fourth step is about. See, your consciousness goes here. Here's another thing. Here's another thing. Here's another thing. It's all there, right? This process says that doesn't have to be your story anymore. We're going to create a new story for you. Doesn't mean we disregard the old story, but we change the story that we can find peace with it. You'll know a new freedom and a new happiness. That's the whole point of this. How many people would like a new freedom and a new happiness from their past? How many people would like their past stopping eating their lunch for them? That's what this is about.
The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again.
Not the obsession, the insanity. If you don't deal with the shit that's eating your lunch, you will drink again.
And with us...
Or kill yourself.
Yeah.
How many people sat there and thought, I ain't going on like this. Right? There's freedom from that. Like, that's kind of, right? There's actual freedom from that. Believe me, okay, we'll go on.
And with us, to drink is to die. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger.
How many people like to be free of it? So they're going to give us they're giving us the recipe to do that. But you need to know the recipe. In order to do that, you need to do this. Writing your life story won't do it. Writing 4 or 5 resentments won't do it. You need a house cleaning. You need to clean the abscesses that are still connected to your experience.
The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for the alcoholic, these things are poison.
So, when they say the grouch and the brainstorm, they don't mean good ideas. We're brainstorming, that's not that kind of brainstorm. The brainstorm. You know what a brainstorm is? Think about that. The brainstorm. Storm within your brain. And it's not a little wind blowing through the front door. Oh, open the door. Isn't that nice? It's not one of those. Anybody ever see The Wizard of Oz here? Yeah. Lift the whole house up. And, hey, there's us on the bike. A storm. I mean, it's a chaos. We're bombarded by thoughts and ideas. Anybody get sideswiped by some of their emotions or ideas and their past, crippled by that stuff? Brainstorm. Once you open the door, it's kind of like the shutter. Once the shutters are open, it's kind of like knock you on your ass kind of stuff. Anybody have that stuff going on? So we're not alone in that. It's the common experience of all of us. It's the human condition that's crippling us, right? So we need a new experience from that stuff, right?
We turned back to the list, for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle.
So most things we look at is from left to right. On the sheets, we're going to look at it from right to left. Entirely different angle. We're going to see how we started setting the ball rolling based on our instincts. And where they talk about in the 4th column here is where we had been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, or inconsiderate. Most of the things that occurred in my life, 98% of them, I created. Based on one of those things, based on my instincts. The things that continue to happen in my life after the first time it happened, I still created it. Out of fear, out of conditioning, out of whatever. The inability, like where I grew up and the things that happened, the things that continue to happen, I didn't have any other, it was fear. That was the basis of my life. And so what kept on creating these things was fear. Fear of not telling somebody, the fear of not involving somebody, the fear of it will be worse if I let people know. So it was hard kind of thing. So what created these things to happen was fear. It arose out of myself to stop me from correcting it. And I kind of went, yeah, it didn't mean to beat myself up. That means that was the best I can do for what happened back then. That's my story back then. Would it be different today? 100%. If I was the same person today and I was back there living that stuff, it'd be different. I'd have a different story based on who I am today. Because I wouldn't continue to be in those situations or allow those things to happen or to put myself in those situations. Because of my self-esteem, my ambitions, my security. One of these things led me to those people, places, and things. Kind of is really a hard egg to swallow, right? Okay, but it's freeing.
Yes, it is. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill.
Fancied or real, that means when they say the list, if that's the way you see it, put it down. Because I was thinking, did that actually happen or did that didn't happen? Because I have a lot of my story I don't really remember. People told me. I've come to in situations kind of, oh, this ain't good. And then go back in old blackout. Like I have a lot of stories where I woke up in places going, whoa, this ain't good. Thank God I went into another blackout. How many people got those stories where you wake up in situations or places with people, places, and things, you go, oh my God, I'm going back to AA.
Take another drink.
Take another drink. I got 11 years of that. Okay.
How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how?
So you're not going to be without resentments. As long as you have the human condition and you're thinking, you're going to be prone to resentments. So now you need to find a way to escape these resentments. But how? Right? Isn't that a good question?
How?
How many people like to know how to escape and master resentments?
We could not wish them away any more than alcohol.
How many people let it go, ignore it? Acceptance. That doesn't work for people like us. You need to deal with all this stuff before you can find acceptance. If acceptance worked, wouldn't that be nice? Just bypass the steps and go right to acceptance. Another form of self-delusion, right? Driven by 100 forms of self-delusion. How many people like I don't need to do that card? I'm feeling so much better now. Again, welcome back. Again, right? So we're escape artists. Any escape artists here? That's why we can't trust ourselves to really gauge ourselves. That's why when we go through this process, we have things to see if it's actually true what's happening or not true what's happening. Did I formulate this delusion of things have changed or things have actually changed? Am I trying to convince everybody around me things have changed? Or have they changed? I need an ability to be able to assess myself based on what's happening inside of me, not around me. Because we're chameleons. Anybody think they have everybody around them fooled? And then when you're left alone, you're not so fooled? When you're alone with yourself, this is where you know whether you actually have a new freedom and a new happiness. When the lights go out and you're alone or you're sitting alone in your own thoughts, can you sit comfortably within your own being for periods of time? Or do you need to have a constant distraction from you? And that's what they're saying here. I need to escape. I need to find a new way of processing life. I need to find a new way to find peace within myself without causing me more pain. Because we are escape. Anybody got a list of things that make them feel better? That make you feel worse? Anybody doing things that they don't want to do? And not doing things that they want to do? Lack of power. That's what they're saying here. They're saying it's these internal things that are doing it. So I need to learn how to master resentment.
This was our course.
This was our course.
We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, "This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done."
So where is this happening? Where's this recipe happening? They just gave us a recipe.
In prayer.
Inside my thinking. Mm-hmm. Now, when these things start happening, I'm starting to look at these people differently. I need to look at them differently. Because I see how I operate under self-will or my instincts and the harms I've created people, what I've done to people based on me. And it wasn't personal, the things I did. I couldn't have done it any other way because of my instincts. Now I see they, like myself, were instinct-based or spiritually sick. They couldn't help doing what they did. So my mom, my dad, and people, it wasn't personal. The things I did to people wasn't personal, well, somewhere, but based on my lifestyle. That's a whole different story. But the whole idea is that I see I couldn't help but do those things. I couldn't help conduct myself in that manner because I didn't have the power to have a different experience. I was driven by these things. And same with these people, places, and things. They couldn't have done it any different. And I was just collateral damage in their lives. Just like the people were in my lives. So when my mom's situation come up, or my dad's situation come up, or that club situation come up, or this situation come up, I'm able to step back from it and look at them differently. And pray that prayer to correct it in my mind. So as I start correcting my attachment to these people, places, things in my mind, I start getting separation from it. I start looking at them differently. It didn't mean what they did was okay. It meant I started getting freedom from it because I started to see it wasn't personal. Anybody in that situation and any one of those things of my past would have had the same experience. It wasn't personal, even though it felt personal. anybody in that same situation would have had the same outcome and the same experience. Right? So when I see Bob, right, Uncle Bob, I see it wasn't just me. I'm just using it in kind of general way. It could have been anybody if Uncle Bob was somebody else's uncle or somebody else, right? Anybody in that situation would have got the same treatment or the same deceit or the same experience. Does that kind of make sense? When I ended up in that wrong place at the wrong time by how I placed myself there and what happened, anybody in that same situation would have got the same thing. Didn't mean I have to like it. Just means I start correcting it within inside of myself, and I start applying the prayer. So that's the resentment prayer of the people, places, and things of the shift that ain't happening yet. So 90% of my a lot of the shift will happen. For the other stuff that we still cling on to or still has that cyst or that pain attached to it, we start chopping away at the tie to it like a big root system. Imagine every time you step back and you take an axe and you chop it like a big rope holding a ship, right? The ship's meant to be in the sea and kind of the experience. But if it's still anchored and it can't get away from the shore, it's not living the way or designed to be what it's supposed to be. So imagine chopping that thing every time it comes up. You chop, and pretty soon you have the freedom from it. Awesome. And this is part 1. Next week we'll do part 2. What's the most important part of the 4th step? The prayer. Prayer, accessing that power where it creates change within inside of yourself. The experience of this change that starts happening within inside of yourself. On Tuesday nights, we close with a great meditative prayer as suggested in step 11. We close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. We have the worksheets for those who want to get involved. If you need extra help, Tuesdays and Fridays at 6 o'clock we meet in this room.